Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Megan Haas. Megan is a former cyber and forensic services partner at PwC with over 30 years' experience in information risk management and assurance and core competencies centred around governance, risk, IT and cybersecurity. After spending many years advising audit committees and specialising in business and information technology processes and controls, she turned her focus to increasing stakeholder confidence and governance of cybersecurity and privacy, anti-fraud and corruption risks, compliance and post-incident remediation. During her professional services career, Megan spent many years working in the UK, Europe and most recently in Asia, where she was based for 6 years in Hong Kong and where we first met. Megan's current board roles include RMIT University, Development Victoria and the advisory board of the University of Melbourne Academic Centre for Cybersecurity Excellence. Megan, I'm thrilled to have you join me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I've just talked a little bit about you from your bio, but it'd be great to hear a bit more about your career in cybersecurity to date.
Wow. So I was reflecting on how to share with you and the listeners my career. It's interesting, when I went back to the beginning of my career, it was the late 80s. I majored in information systems at university, so wanted to explore the avenues. Joined Pricewaterhouse, as was back in the day, and spent the first few years working with mainframes. You know, back in the day, there were only two key information security systems, RACF and ACF2, and this was pre-internet, so life was very different. My first training was in binary and audit assembler and thinking about how to interrogate files on mainframes. So it was a very different world. Applications were all standalone. So everything was very sort of insular at the time. And we spent as much time as IT professionals looking at physical security of computer rooms as we did of, logical security. I moved on and moved away, decided I wanted to go and explore the world and ended up in London, as you said, and then spent 10 years in Europe. By then we'd moved into sort of minis and all things integration, and interfaces were sort of key. How do we get these disparate systems to talk to each other? So I spent a lot of time looking at completeness and accuracy and validity, and the constants that came through was still who can access what, and how do we but the world has started to change, because now we had individuals passing through systems, which was presented different risks. Moving on, I come back to Australia and to the world of ERPs, middleware starting. My role then was thinking through what are the risks and the potential responses that organisations can take to those, and building and managing my teams out. Roll forward another decade and decided it was time for a change. And as you say, I stayed with PwC, as was then, all that time, but moved countries again, and this time decided to head towards Asia and the China business. That was a fascinating 6 years, and obviously that's also where you and I met, as you said. And I focused there. That was still thinking about information security at the base, but that was where the cyber terminology was sort of first coined for me, was in those years, and the world started to turn, because then we had emerging technologies. We have lots of different sorts of environments, and the IT universe was ever expanding. Anything that can be networked can be hacked. So we started to then see different sorts of risks emerging that required different sorts of responses. When I finished up there and came back to Australia in early 2017, the cyber landscape in Australia had moved as well. We have some very technical disciplines emerging within the cyber umbrella. And I think one of my challenges was how to, create a team. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in conjunction or blending, I suppose, those skills in a cohesive way. After a couple of years back in Australia, I decided it was time for me to move on and do something different. And so now I have started developing a non-executive portfolio, which I'm absolutely loving. I think part of it is engaging with different sorts of people around governance and risk with a focus on cyber, but it's allowing me to bring together not only my technical skills, but also, the governance, the strategic, and the people skills, the cultural skills that I've developed along the way, to hopefully be in a position to add value, but bring a different perspective to the board table.
You've had such a varied career, and while you've spent most of that time, in the one organisation, being across the world and working as an expat, the people that you meet and the clients that you must have served. I mean, in terms of the teams, what have you noticed about the teams that not only you had or built within PwC, but across the world? What were security teams like for your clients?
Wow. So security teams they're almost a universe in themselves. You've got almost the complete ecosystem from strategy through all of the different technical domains through to risk and governance. And so, the makeup of the teams is by necessity, diverse. And I think that what I've seen over the years is as the evolution of our systems, has been occurring, so have the evolution of security teams. And, I think the human skills now are as important as the technical skills. And I find that the more successful teams are the ones that actually can blend all of those skills together.
Did you find that building your own teams, over the time, you created some hiring principles that you used, or that you realised that time and time again you were hiring sort of under the same criteria or values, I suppose, for your own, to have the right people surround you?
In my world, there were two different types of hiring in sort of broad buckets. So there's the graduate. So and I say graduate as a generic term. Nowadays, of course, I don't mean people who have finished a degree necessarily or solely. I mean people who have finished a TAFE course, for example, or people that have undertaken an apprenticeship, or people who may have come from a number of different pathways, but are starting off their career in professional services under that sort of banner. The other bucket being the experienced hires. The approaches for both are quite different, and I think we are with some underlying similarities in terms of characteristics of the individuals. I think with a graduate in that bucket, you're looking for people who have a great curiosity of mind, right? Combined with the ability to collaborate, they're interested in what's going on around them. I think, and you've heard this before, without doubt, we can teach and do teach a lot of technical capability and aptitude. What we can't teach, is those humanistic skills. And so for younger people coming through different pathways, that's what we're looking for. And I think for me, that's why having those pathways in terms of not just the higher ed, but the vocational learning, the apprenticeship, all of those different pathways is so critical there to get a really interesting blend and diversity of thought. For the experienced hires, well, that's tougher. I cannot tell you how often I was told that the person we're looking for doesn't exist. And my response is, well, we're asking the wrong questions, and so let's start back with, what is it that we're looking for? Let's break down these position descriptions, which can sometimes, can be just rolled over. And, that I think has caused a lot of grief to a lot of organisations where, what we're asking for and what we really need can be two different things. So to me, a good PD is when somebody reads it and says, that could be me. There's something in that I relate to that says, wow, I might go and investigate that because that could be me, and that I really like, rather than well, it's not me because I can't, tick this box or this box or this box.
That's a really good segue into my next question because, it's often said that women don't apply for jobs if they read the job description and they can't do everything that's on the list. And, I'm interested if you've experienced this, because I certainly have, that there's a lot of leaders around who are asking or are seeking candidates that or a shortlist that has a balance of males and females in it because of gender diversity requirements. And, gender is not the only type of diversity that we need in teams, but particularly obviously it's an easily measured metric when it comes to diversity. I mean, do you think getting more women into shortlists is an approach that's going to help our industry to be more diverse, or do you think it's kind of an approach that's not really going to get us where we need to be?
No, I think it's a good thing. I think that if you follow the logic through, having more females on the shortlist means you've had more applications or applicants on your longer list. So how you've gone about advertising the job, how you've described it and the capabilities required, you have more interest being demonstrated by a wider pool of people. So I think that's a good thing in the first instance, and therefore it flows that the shortlist should have more diversity from a gender perspective. Where I think we need to maintain that rage, though, is that then the interviewing process or the process by which the organisation considers their candidates, those individuals doing the interviewing or doing the reviewing of the candidates also needs to reflect the diversity of thinking, so that logic follows through.
I think that's so true, and I think part of the problem is not getting the females in the shortlist. It's getting the females to apply in the first place. And your mention about getting a great job description is probably an interesting place to start, to making sure that we are opening these roles up to being attractive to women and maybe to women specifically, because I think the men will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, that could be me is really an important concept. So I had our team go through the positions that were being advertised for a review from a gender perspective in terms of the language that was used, equally the credentialing and the capability referencing that we were asking for, to remove some of the black and white type stuff to try and enhance that applicant pool.
Just out of interest, did you find at PwC that you had trouble attracting sort of a gender diverse range of applicants?
Yep. Yes, look, I think we were, the organisation is not unlike all of the others. And so I think, there needs to be part of the ability for somebody to see, right? That sort of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. We've heard that mantra very often in this space. And, I certainly look at organisations and I look at the women leaders and I look at the turnover of women and in leadership roles, and I think about the impact that might have. And so I think every organisation, in the cyber sphere is struggling with that notion of, the acquiring women leaders and then retaining them and integrating them in. And really it's the inclusion part of the diversity and inclusion. And I think it's the more successful organisations are those that can actually, show that they've inbuilt this into their culture.
The point I want to pick up on in what you just said is about retention. And, you stayed with the one organisation for the best part of your career. And that's not really the norm these days. Like it used to be, but, I think I saw a stat recently that suggested that the average in Australia is about 3 to 4 years to stay in an organisation. What do you think kept you in the one organisation, and what could we learn from that so that our industry can retain people better?
Mm. I love the idea of a new day being unlike the day before. And PwC provided me with just an amazing environment in this respect. So no 2 days were the same. And I love the idea of movement. I need to move during my day, and it's the flow of thinking, the physical flow of moving from one place to the next, or one building to another, or one client to another. And so for me, the constant was my technical skills and the methodologies and the thinking that I applied to my work. And that remained constant globally for me in whichever country I was in. What changed was the people around me, the clients, the industries, and the cultures. And that for me just kept it fresh and alive. And I think that portfolio approach, if I can term it like that, is still what's driving me in the next phase of my career. And one of the key elements that's interesting for me in exploring a non-executive portfolio is that ability to bring what I've learned and what I've experienced into a different scenario at at each given organisation.
Now that you are in that sort of next phase and working as a non-executive director on a number of boards, what are you noticing about the different cybersecurity conversation and the desire for boards to understand what security teams are doing? I mean, are you seeing different things now that you are at that next level up in an organisation?
So my observation would be that the interest has clearly grown and expanded, and there's been a real shift in understanding the concepts around cyber risk. There are presentations being given to the board and to the subcommittees and much more regularly. And I think that directors, they're becoming more literate, to cybersecurity, the terminology. It's less scary perhaps than it was. People are feeling like they're coming to grips with the concepts. I think part of that is that most directors have more than one directorship, and what they're able to do is compare and contrast either in their own minds or pose questions to people presenting to them based on what they might have heard elsewhere. So it gives them an opportunity to have a bit of a check and a balance, if you will, across different organisations. And I think that also helps reinforce some of that understanding. I think that there is always the question around the ability of directors to interpret the responses to questions, and where management is asserting a particular control environment, how that actually plays out in reality and what that means. But I think that there's good signs that's a work in progress. I also think there's more training available. So the AICD is now running sessions. Law firms are running sessions. The professional services firms are obviously running sessions. And, in the boardroom, there is now independent type training done purely for directors' education as well. And the confluence of all of that definitely is helping shift the paradigm forward.
If you could consider those pieces of information that you've just shared around, what's being done at a board level to educate, I mean, what would be your advice? You've had a long, successful career to date and plenty more ahead of you. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give to people listening who might be planning to run a security team or might like to run a security team or be in a position where they're exposed to one? And, what would be the one piece of advice that you could give that I guess would help them on that journey?
So cyber teams have been built upon technical expertise. Information security going way back to the 80s, it was a technical field, and you needed to learn how the different systems and the concepts applied. And that has continued to grow and expand as more technical domains have been introduced into the information security life cycle. To me, the key challenge is to recognise and the need for this ongoing technical competency, but equally integrate and align the humanistic skills. So one concept that many teams struggle with is the technical versus generalist concept. I'm a cyber generalist, or I'm a technical cyber person. And that comes with its own set of, preferences and potentially prejudices about, different pros and cons for both of those. So to me, the successful cyber team is the one where the leader is able to harness and recognise the capability strengths that are coming from all of the different parts and, blend those into the team construct.
Megan, I think that's such good advice. And if people wanted to chat more with you about that or are interested to connect with you, what's the best place for people to do that?
Best place to connect with me would be via LinkedIn. I follow Twitter, but I'm not terribly active. It's just not one that's worked for me thus far. So LinkedIn, absolutely. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Claire. Appreciate it.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.